Okay, so that previous exercise was an example of a very simple test. Now let's go up in complexity a little bit. And the next exercise we're going to do, we're going to write a test case to basically check our response data, check that JSON value. So right now, we're sending a request to get the current weather for a particular city. Now, I get my response, it all looks fine, but how do I know that the response I get is actually the weather for the city that I'm asking for? Like I'm asking for, in this case, the weather for San Francisco. How do I know that this is actually the weather for San Francisco in my data? Well, if you look at the response data, you can see there the name. There's this name field, and it tells me that this information, this data, is for the city of San Francisco. So I want to check to make sure that it's correct for requests that I send. So the test that we're going to do now, and you can have as many test cases as you like for a request. We just add them one after another. This one, we're going to use the snippet response body JSON value check. So I click on that to insert that in. And let's give that a test name of check correct city. And the way we get our JSON data is we have this function pm.response.json. So that gives us our data, and we'll store that in a variable called JSON data. When we do our pm.expect, we just do JSON data.value equals to something. Now this value here, this refers to which field that we want to check in our data. So in this particular case, I'm looking at the name field, and I want to check that against the value that I'm expecting. So .name to equal to San Francisco. On the exercise, it'll say use Sydney, but you can change that to whatever city you want. So I'll save that. Now, before I send the request, let's make sure that my current value is configured correctly. So getting the weather for San Francisco, hit send. And on my test results, both test cases pass. If, however, I go and change the city to something else, let's go New York, and send. Now you can see that one of my test cases fails. Check correct city, assertion error, expected New York to equal San Francisco. So basically, we're expecting the value of San Francisco, but in the response data, if I look at the body again, this time we got the value of New York, and hence my test case does not pass. So this is your next exercise using the test assertions. Have a go at that. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, how's everyone going? We all good to continue? Okay. So you might have realized that there's one little problem with this particular test, and that is every time I go and change the value, I have to change that value on my test case as well, which is not ideal because as soon as I change the value to a different city, my test case fails. So to improve on that, why don't we use our variables so that we can basically check that the value, that the city that we're getting is equal to whatever I specified on that city variable. To use our variables in scripts, we can get a variable value by using pm.environment.get and then specify the variable that you want. If that's an environment variable, if it's a global variable, pm.globals.get and then followed by your variable as well. You can also set variables by using .set and specify your key and value. And so with that in mind, let's modify our test case so that when we check for the city, instead of hard coding that value in there, what we want to check for is that this value is equal to whatever my city variable is. So there is a snippet we can use. There is get environment variable, so I can put that in there. And I can either just put this directly into that parameter, or if I want to make it a bit more clear, I can say var city equals to, And then here I will replace San Francisco with my city variable. And then, of course, the variable key is city. That's the name of my variable. So when I talked about variable scopes, if you define variables here, these are your local variables. But let's send this. And now you can see my test results are once again perfect. And I can change my city now from New York to whatever. Let's go overseas to London. Hit send. And now that still passes. And if I check the body of my response, we can make sure that we are indeed getting the weather for London. So that is 5.3. So in my instructions, I haven't specified the exact code that you need to put in. It's a little bit of a challenge to see if you can work that out. I've demonstrated the snippet, but also it is available in the exercise text file if you need it. OK. So that was our variables in testing. Now, the Postman Sandbox API, that is the JavaScript execution environment that we run our scripts in. And so if you want a full API reference, there's a link to the documentation there. That'll also tell you what JavaScript libraries are available that you can use. And as a quick summary of the module, we test our APIs for functionality, performance, reliability, and security. In our examples, we were primarily testing functionality, making sure we're getting the correct data. The JavaScript code is executed against the response that we get from our requests. And we test that response by checking its values, status codes, and headers, etc. Now, the last module we have is Workspaces, how to collaborate through Workspaces. So let's talk about how we can set up additional workspaces and use it to share and organize our various collections. So earlier on, I mentioned that we can export a collection into a JSON file and then import that as well. Use that JSON file to do an import. The same can be applied to environments. You can download an environment to a JSON file and then import that environment as well. And that's a basic method of collaboration. I guess the downside to that is you don't get any synchronization. If anything changes, you have to export and import again. So with Workspaces, we can actually share our collections and environments between different workspaces, and they'll be synchronized. A workspace is essentially just a view of our Postman elements. So collections, environments, mocks, monitors, all of those belong to a workspace. There are two types of workspaces. Your personal workspaces, those are workspaces that only you can see, and you can have as many of those as you want. And then you have team workspaces where you can invite users into that workspace or invite and share with your members, with your team members. You invite users into the workspace, and you can grant them permissions on various collections within that workspace. You can also invite people into a personal workspace as well, but when you do that, it actually automatically converts to a team workspace. There are many different reasons why we use workspaces. So organizing is one of them, either at a personal level and at a team level as well. When you have lots and lots of collections, you probably don't want everything on the same workspace. You want to have them across different workspaces, maybe organized by project or however you want to organize your work, and likewise at a team level as well. A workspace can also act as a single source of truth. APIs need a single source of truth so that when I look at a collection, I know that this is the collection that defines what my API is, and I know all the different endpoints that I can call. You can use workspaces as a means of discovery. So if you're working on a particular project, you might not necessarily know all the different APIs or collections that are involved in that project unless you have access to that workspace. So you invite someone into your workspace or into that project's workspace, for example, and they can straight away see all the different collections or the different APIs they're going to be working with. So these are some of the reasons why we use workspaces. To create workspaces is pretty straightforward. You choose your workspace type, either team or personal. Give it a name. If you're creating a team workspace, you also have the option of inviting users, either by entering their email address, or you could drop a CSV or text file to bulk invite people. As I mentioned before, you can invite users into a personal workspace, but it'll convert into a team workspace automatically. So we'll do a quick exercise where we basically create 2 workspaces, 1 personal and 1 team workspace. So we'll go create new, and I'll call this the demo workspace, demo personal. The type here, I'll select personal, and when you're creating a personal workspace, that's all you need to do, name and summary. When you create, it'll automatically switch you into that workspace as well. So now you can see I am on the demo personal workspace, and this is empty. Let's create one more. And let's create a team one. So we'll keep the type as team. I won't actually invite anyone here, but you could enter a list of email addresses if you want. And then down at the bottom, you've got workspace visibility. We'll keep that as default. And then everyone in your team can view and join this workspace as either an admin or a collaborator. I'll keep it at collaborator and create. And there's my team workspace. And when you're switching between, you've got your personal and your team tabs at the top, so you can switch between workspaces of those different types. I seem to have 2 of these demo ones. Okay, so this one's populated. Let me get rid of this. No, I'll keep it there. I just know that one's empty. All right, so I'll go back to my fundamentals workshop. All right, so very quickly, just set up those 2 workspaces. Okay. So to browse a workspace, there's an additional view down at the bottom. We can see the build and browse. In browse mode, basically, you're looking at all the elements of your workspaces, so all the collections you have, your workspace history, the environments that you've got set up, and also if you have monitors and mocks, they will also appear on the browse view as well. So you can switch between browse and build view. We've primarily been using our build view throughout the whole course. Now, once we have our workspaces, we can start to share and organize our collections. So collections can be shared between our workspaces, and they're synchronized, which means if I update the collection on one workspace, it'll be automatically reflected in any other workspace that the collection is shared with. So other team members can view and or edit the collection as well. They can create new requests or modify the existing requests. And that's what we'll do here. We will share that RESTful Booker collection with the workspace that we created. We'll share it with the team workspace. So here's the RESTful Booker collection. So make sure you switch back to whichever workspace you're on that you created your collection in, and then go to RESTful Booker, share collection, and choose the team workspace. Now we can filter this by team, and I'm going to share it with this demo team space here. So hit share and continue. And then when you get to this next part, for everyone that's in the workspace, and for me it's only one person, you can choose whether those people can be editors or just viewers of your collection. So I'm going to select editor, and everyone in your team also has the viewer role on that collection, but currently there's no one else in this workspace. So save. And if I then switch to my demo team space, you'll see that RESTful Booker collection over here. And to demonstrate the synchronization, I'm going to quickly just duplicate the get all bookings request. So now we have 2 of them. And if I switch back to my fundamentals workshop, you can see that straight away reflected there. So any change you make to the collection on one workspace is reflected on any other workspace the collection is shared with. So that's exercise 6.2. All right, everyone shared their collection? Okay. There are some usage limits when we are sharing our collections across workspaces. So accounts that are on a free plan are allocated a limit of these, and you can check that limit by clicking on the upgrade drop-down list. So you can see number of shared requests, mock usage, etc. So that's down on this button here. So shared requests, I'm at 7 out of 25 because I shared my RESTful Booker, and there's 4 of them in there, and there must be another collection that I've shared somewhere else as well. And if you want unlimited sharing, then you can upgrade to Postman Pro or Enterprise. Now, just like we did with our collections, we can share our environments in exactly the same way. They are also synchronized as well. But remember what I mentioned earlier, when you're sharing environments, if there's any sensitive data like API keys, passwords, make sure you don't set the initial value on those environment variables, unless, of course, you actually want to share the password or API key, like if you're using the same one for everyone. So to do that, let's demonstrate this in an exercise. And this will be the last exercise for the session. So we want to share this RESTful Booker admin environment to the same team workspace where I shared my RESTful Booker collection. Before I share, let's double check my variables, making sure that on the password, I don't have an initial value. I've got a placeholder, and that's fine. Now, for the current value, I can change it to whatever I like, but I'll keep that as password123 for the moment. I'll update this. And to share the environment, you can see the share button right here. So I'll click on share, and I choose the workspace I want to share with. Now, in this drop-down, the team workspaces have that people icon on the right-hand side, so I know which ones are team and which ones are my personal workspaces. So there's the demo team space. Share. Now what I'll do is I'll switch into that demo team space. And if I look at the RESTful Booker admin environment, see how the current value did not synchronize across? It is the placeholder of your password. Now I'm going to change this to whatever the password I want to use here, just any random value. So the current value on this workspace is my password. So this is the local value that's unique to myself and this particular workspace. So my password is the value on my demo team space, but if I switch back to the fundamentals workshop and I have a look at that RESTful Booker admin environment, the current value is still set to password123. So that's the session variables at work there. So that's exercise 6.3. That's the last exercise for the course. There's a couple of additional slides after that, and then we'll wrap things up. All right, how's everyone going? We all good? Okay. So this diagram here just illustrates the synchronization that occurs when we share collections and environments between workspaces. So your collections and environments are synchronized between them. And when we use workspaces to organize, workspaces are quite a free-form organization principle. So it is really up to you how you want to organize it. We have some suggestions, but it's not the definitive guide for this is how you should do it. So some of the suggestions are you can organize by function. So a workspace for documentation, workspace for testing, if different teams using those different workspaces. The testing team will work on there, or use the testing workspace and write all the scripts in there within the collection. But the documentation team will use the same, work on the same collection, but they'll have their own workspace to use that collection, and they'll write the documentation for it. You can organize by product or project. So you have a workspace for the product. All the collections that you need for testing the API on that product would go into that workspace. Same thing applies for the project as well. You might also organize by partners as well. So if you're collaborating with various partners on a particular API or collection, you set up a workspace, invite that partner into the workspace, and they can work on the collection or API. And you can decide to either give them like viewing access only, or you can allow them to edit things as well. And that's a review of the module. So team workspaces are important for collaboration and making sure that you share your environments and collections across those workspaces. But again, when you're sharing the environments, make sure you make use of the session variables to avoid sharing sensitive data like your password. For additional references, there's the included links there. So the documentation, the blogs, that RESTful Booker API that we were working with, you can find the docs for that API on that link there. We'll be using the same API in the expert course, although I have my own version of that. So we'll be working with that throughout the expert course and using those additional endpoints there. And that's it for Postman fundamentals. So any questions before we finish and go to lunch?